So let's talk about the project. So there's going to be a couple of milestones. The first one is due in a couple of weeks, which is P1, and this is the description. A couple of paragraphs from you and your teammates on what is it you're building. All work will be done on a GitHub repository of your choice. You will create a repository, and the GitHub repository allows you to create wiki pages, right? So we'll ask you to create several wiki pages that will first describe your team, that this is a particular project for web development for Northeastern University. These are the team members. Instructions on how to download and compile the project. There'll be one wiki page where you're going to describe your project, and we'll ask you to several paragraphs describing what it is that you're building, what the problem statement is, what are you suggesting, how to solve it, and also any APIs that you might be using. Also describe where you're getting the data, right? So we're going to be using real live data as opposed to static data or things that you might import into a database. So one of the requirements is to identify a third-party API that you need to integrate to, right? And so that when folks come to your website and start interacting with it and searching or they'll be interacting with the live data feed, right? So they'll be asking for information about real movies, real recipes, real sports, real whatever it is that your domain is. So one of the first things is that you'll need to identify what domain it is that you're of interest that you want to focus on, and some API that provides some data source about that particular domain. Your database should only be used for storing any cached information that you might need locally, but not necessarily to replicate the entire data set that would be otherwise available remotely in this service. So this is the project description. As this is a first approach suggestion of what you might think you're going to be building. It is okay to change your mind and add a couple things, remove a couple things. So it doesn't have to be set in stone. It can evolve over the next month or so as you're working on this. But it has to meet certain requirements. Okay, so you're free to really build whatever you want as long as you're within the requirements listed here. Okay. So here are the requirements. The requirements are fairly generic. So hopefully they will be useful for most of everything you guys are going to think of building. So hopefully it'll meet 80% of everybody's expectations of what they want to build. I'm sure there's going to be 10, 20% of folks here that might want to go beyond what's here or something fairly different than what's proposed here, and that's fine. If only then you should come to me and ask, what could we negotiate in terms of complexity. But if you fall within these requirements, you're pretty much free to do whatever you want. So you don't have to ask for permission. Right. So if you come asking, the first thing I'll ask you, do you think it meets the requirements? Do you have an example of this, an example of that, an example of, if you do, then that's fine. So let's go over the general requirements. So first of all, some generic requirements on the pages or types of pages that we're looking for. There should be some form of landing page, the first page that you come to, perhaps mapped to the root context or /home if you prefer. And that home page should be dynamic in that it should know whether you're logged in or not. if you're logged in, then it should show information about you. Something that is pertinent to knowing that it's you who's coming here. If I don't know who you are, if the application doesn't finds it as an anonymous user, then it should show some generic information, right, that would be applicable to anyone. It could show perhaps the latest some latest news or some latest information of the latest blog post, the latest review, the latest recipe that was uploaded, the latest anyone who just recently joined, whatever, but something generic that is not specific to any one person, if it's anonymous. If you're logged in, you can also provide that same generic information plus some additional information that might be specific to the person who just logged in. And if I navigate through other pages and I come back, ideally it would remember that it's still me. It would still display things that are pertinent to me. Make sense? All right. From the home page, I can navigate to several places. I could perhaps navigate to, depending on whether I'm logged in or not. If I am logged in, I can perhaps navigate to my profile page. If I'm not logged in, perhaps I could navigate to somebody else's profile page. Okay, and that the profile page that I see would be dependent on whether I'm logged in or not. Right. So if I'm logged in, I can see my profile page. I can see my public information. I can see my private information. I can see information that is related to me somehow. Right. All the blog posts that I've written, all the reviews that I've written, all the folks that I'm following, folks that are following me, everything that is related to me somehow should be accessible from my profile. If not the actual data, there should be some link or list of links that would allow me to navigate to anything that is related to me. Okay, so if that user has any relationships with anything else, it should be accessible from here. Okay, if I'm not logged in, perhaps obviously I won't have a profile if I'm not logged in, but perhaps from the home page there could be a link to the folks who have recently joined, perhaps. And I could click on their profile link, and that would navigate me to a profile of that person. Yes? So I can see somebody else's profile. That information could perhaps contain information that might be public information. But it should hide things that you consider to be private, right? That it would not be appropriate to share. Maybe an email, phone number, address. None of that should be available if somebody visits my profile and I don't know them and I have no relationship to them. Perhaps you might choose that I do show lists of or links to things that that particular person is associated with. Maybe I don't see their private information, but I see that they like this movie, right? Or that they've written this review, right? Or they like this recipe. That'd be okay, right? That could be public. And they should be mapped to different URLs. One /profile, that's me. You don't need to know my ID because it's me. So the state should be maintained by the server. The server should know that I'm logged in and the state information is there in the session. Whereas if I'm navigating to somebody else's profile, then I need to provide the ID of that other person who I'm navigating to. So the URLs are slightly different. One uses the user ID, the other one does not. Okay. From the home page or from anywhere, I guess, you should be able to navigate to some page that should allow you to do some kind of search. Right? And the search could be either by filling out a form or some drop-downs or checkboxes. However you want folks to be able to provide some criteria to search something. Right? Search for your favorite movie, your recipes, your favorite sport, your restaurants around you, events around you, whatever. Okay, and that search page could also contain a list of summarized results that meet your criteria. Right, so there might be a form, or you click on search, and then it goes off to the cloud and passes the criteria out to the cloud. It comes back with some summary results. Right, maybe the title of a movie, maybe the rating, and maybe a thumbnail. That's it. Okay? And maybe a long list of movies that meet your criteria. It could be one page. Maybe you want to split it into 2 pages. That's up to you. So you might want to lay it out. You might want to call one /search and the other one /results. Right? In either case, the search should be somehow encoded in the URL, so that if I refresh the page, it should render the same exact thing. Right? So, for instance, if I go to the search page, initially it'll be empty because I haven't searched anything. But if I search for Batman for my favorite movie, it will come up with 20 movies that match my query. Yes? Typically, if I refresh the page, right, and my URL is just /search, it will clear out my results, and it'll just show me again my empty page. Yes? Right, so somehow you need to encode, or you need to remember that the page was just showing me the results of Batman. There's a couple of strategies on how to do that. You can cache it on the server. You can cache it on the client. You can encode it in the URL, so that when you refresh, the search string is part of the URL, and you know that you need to do the search again. You have to go fetch the same 20 movies, right, that match your favorite Batman movie. Make sense? Right. So the search page, or the /search/results page, should be mapped to a encoded URL. All right. So typically, you should be able to grab the URL, email it to someone, and they should be able to click that URL, and they should see exactly what that person was seeing. That's the whole point of a URL, right? Okay. So the state is encoded in the URL. All right. So once you click on how you display the summary information here, that's up to you. If it's a table or it's it's maybe in a grid or a list or whatever you decide to render it, that's up to you. The layout and styling is entirely up to you. If I click on a particular item, whatever it is, it will navigate me to a details page. Right? The details page will be mapped to /details, and then some identifier that should be enough to know what it is that you want me to show. Right? So if I click on Batman Returns, there'll be some ID that for Batman Returns, and it'll show me details about that particular movie. Okay, maybe a whole bunch of posters, the plot, the actors, the director, a whole bunch of things. Right? Now that information is generic information, right, about a movie. That information should not live in your database. It should go out to the network, to some API, fetch that generic information about that specific movie, and display some content that is from the remote service. Okay, IMDb or Yelp or wherever. And then down below that, it should show information that is that lives in your application, in your website. Right? For instance, folks that might have folks that have previously searched for Batman might have reviewed Batman, right? Or they might like it, they might hate it, they might left any comment. That should be stored in your database. Right? Because that's part of your community that is using your application. They have been navigating and browsing and liking and hating different things about, right? And so some content comes from your remote service, right? Everything that's generic. The plot, the description, the directors, all that is generic. But then down below should be something that is specific about that movie that is stored in your local database, right? And those reviews or posts or thumbs up, thumbs down, or whatever, or following or bookmarks, might have users associated to them. Who reviewed it? Who wrote this? Who hates this movie? So you should be able to click on their icon or email or username or whatever, and you should be able to navigate to their profile, see who they are. Right? So you should be able to navigate from the content to somebody else's profile and see what other movies they're following, what other things they like, what other things. Now, whether you show private information about that other user, again, it depends whether you're logged in or not. Right? So this private details should be dynamic, whether you show it or don't show it. Right? Maybe we are friends. If we are, then your logic might be that you do share that with your friends. Right? But if you're not friends, then maybe you don't show that. I don't know. Whatever logic you want to use to determine whether you should display private information or not. Okay. What else? If now notice that all this of coming to the home and doing a search and navigating to details, all that does not require me to log in. Right? I could still be anonymous, right, and do all those things. I have access to most of the use cases, even though I might be anonymous. Only when I absolutely need to know who you are, then I would force the user to log in. Right? So for instance, if you click on thumbs up because you like the movie, then the only way is for me to know who you are. Right? If you want to post a review, if you want to leave a comment or anything, I need to know who you are. Right? Then I would challenge the person who wants to like this movie. I would challenge them with a login page. It says, okay, well, I need you to log in for me to know who you are, so I can do the relationship that you like this movie. Right? If I don't know who you are, I can't have that create that relationship. So once I've created the relationship that I thumbs up, thumbs down, or whatnot, you might decide where you want to go. I could navigate back to my profile. My profile should display my new relationship, right? That I like that movie should now be listed there of all the movies that I like, and from here I should be able to navigate back to the details page of whatever it is that I like, whatever thing I wrote. Whatever, anything that is related to me, I should be able to navigate back to. Anybody who I'm following, I should be able to navigate to their profile, right? Whoever I'm following, whoever's following me, or my manager, or folks that I'm managing, any relationship that I might have with other folks, right? Somehow should be accessible from my profile. Okay. The login. This could be could provide both login plus registration in one single page, or you might prefer to split it into two different pages. Some folks might prefer to put it as part of the home page, maybe as input fields at the top, right? And that's provide a login fields at the top of the home page. That's fine too, if you prefer that. So you could merge perhaps the login into the home page, maybe, if you prefer that. Or the register perhaps could be a pop-up. That's okay too. Right? Whatever you decide on how you're going to lay this out, right, it has to be responsive. Right? It has to look okay and usable on a phone. Right? So make sure that whatever you lay out, right, that always to make sure that as you change the size of your window, right, that it looks okay at any width of the window. Right? Don't only look at it at phone size and then at desktop size. Make sure that it scales all the way linearly, right, throughout all the sizes. Right? That it doesn't wrap weird. That things don't overlap something on top of another, right? And that any wrapping or should be intended. It should not be unintended. Okay. All right. So those are the pages. Again, you might prefer to split the profile into multiple pages, perhaps, and provide this functionality across multiple pages. That's okay. Right. The functionality should be there. The functionality should be the same. The layout and the navigation can change. All right, so each one of the pages, everything I just said, hopefully has been captured here for each one of the pages. So for each one of the pages, you have these requirements. Must be mapped to a particular route or context. It must be the first page when you're visiting. Must display generic content. Must display specific content when you're logged in. Must be okay. So it should be clear on what this website is about. We should be able to navigate to your website and know what it is that you want us to do. Okay. If you're Google, you can get away with just a search bar, right? Everybody knows what to do with that search bar, but you're not Google yet. So have maybe a paragraph or so telling us what it is that you want us to type in there. Right? Give us a clue on what's this all about. So the profile page, I think I explained it, right? So must allow users to change their personal information. If a user is logged in, then they can see their profile. Must be accessible to other users, including anonymous users. Must hide personal or private information from others visiting the profile. Must be mapped to /profile. Must be mapped to /profile in the profile ID or user ID. So must group similar or related data. So like a list of all the users I'm following, a list of all the movies I like. So it should be somehow grouped logically, right? Must display a list of snippets of links that allow you to navigate back to folks or domain objects that are related somehow to you. The search and the search results page. So it should display it should provide a form for me to fill out. It should go out to and search at a remote API, not your own API. It could do searches to your own API, obviously, but certainly it needs to go out to a remote API. Right? A case where you might want to go to both is that perhaps you search for a movie and you show a display of the movies, and it might display maybe thumbs up of movies that you have already liked right on the search page or right on the results page. So it needs to hit two queries, right? One to the remote server of the movies that meet your criteria, and then to your application to know which movies you've actually liked. So you would need to mesh those two results into one single results. Must provide a link or button to navigate to details page. Can augment the results with related data with your local data. That's what I just said. It should survive a refresh. Right? If I do Command R or whatever, and I refresh the page, the results page should display the same exact information. Right? Wherever you cache that state, whether you cache it at the server or at the URL, which would be much better. If you cache it at the URL, then it should survive a refresh. The details page is also, it's a mesh of remote data and local data, right? Where the top data will be populated from some remote API, and the bottom one will be populated from a local API. Right, so it should be mapped to some /details and then some unique identifier, and the unique identifier could be used to presumably recreate the page from that ID. You could, if you prefer, use a query in the query string as opposed to a path. That's okay. Logging and register, I just mentioned it. Styling. The application must be usable in desktop, tablet, or phone. You should avoid horizontal scroll bars at all costs, unless it makes sense to use scroll bars. So for instance, in a small screen, well, in a big screen, it might make sense to have your scroll bar go up and down. But on a phone, right, there should be perhaps just one, as it allows you to scroll up and down. If you absolutely need it, perhaps it's a table that doesn't fit, right? Then it's okay maybe for the table to have a scroll go left and right. That's okay, right? But it shouldn't scroll the entire page. So the table should be scrollable, right? But if it's too big to fit, it should not force the entire page to scroll. Make sense? Right? Same thing. If you have an image that doesn't fit, and you want folks to be able to zoom in and zoom out, it makes sense to have, or maybe scroll through a very large image. That's okay to provide a scroll bar for large objects in a small screen, but it should not force the entire page to scroll left and back. So the image should be able to be scrolled or zoomed in or zoom out, but it should not force the entire page to do so. So web pages must be responsive at any width of the browser. Elements must never overlap each other. Again, unless absolutely necessary. Unless that's part of a feature in your application. I don't know. There might be. I don't know. Elements must not wrap unintentionally. Oftentimes it happens that, depending on the size of some title or some piece of information, it pushes everything off, that it doesn't fit anymore, and it wraps. Okay? Make sure that your wrapping is intentional, that you intended that wrap to occur, not that for some reason I didn't see that. It is too big, it doesn't fit, and it wraps because unintentionally. Use some CSS library. You can use CSS library maybe like Bootstrap or Material Design or some other one of these libraries that are specifically for developers. That's okay for you to use them. Do not use some purchased CSS style that takes everything for you, does everything for you, right? So Bootstrap, Material Design, that's okay. White spacing. So make sure that you have appropriate padding, that you have margins, that you have justification. Right. So make sure that what you don't want is content to be flush to the outside container. Right. It's very hard to read when things are so there's always some padding around. See that? There's always padding. There's always padding around and margins. So make sure that you have padding, or also the distance between elements. Make sure that you have justified content. So text should be left justified. Numeric content should be right justified. Currency should have proper formatting with a currency symbol and correct number of decimals. Dates should be properly formatted as well. Wrapping, make sure to avoid unnecessary or unintentional wrapping. Contrast. This happens to me a lot, that they'll put some background in the image, and the contrast, you can't barely read the foreground. Right? It's too light or too dark, and you can't read the foreground because there's not enough contrast between the foreground and the background. Make sure that it's whatever color palette you choose, there's not a nice enough contrast so that it's readable. Labels. Everything should be labeled. Every field should be understood. What is it you're asking me for? I should have a tooltip or some or placeholder that gives me an example of what it is that you want me to type there, or what you want me to select. Look and feel. So the website should be, in general, should look professional, finished, polished, right? That it's you don't want to see it. It's like half done or this is not complete. It should look professional. It should be consistent. So if you chose a particular type of font, be consistent. Use the same font, right? If you selected a particular palette of colors, use that same palette of colors throughout, right? If you have the same background color, the same foreground color, the buttons all have the same colors, right? That the look and feel should be consistent. The wrapping should be consistent. Margins, paddings, white spaces in general should be consistent. Some architectural requirements. If you're using jQuery or using some other non-Angular or React library, make sure that you're wrapping things in immediately invoked functional expressions, right? That you're not littering the namespace. Right? Do not use globals. Don't make sure you encapsulate it in some kind of modular mechanism. if you use Angular or React, it already provides all these high-level constructs. All the data, all the content should be dynamically loaded. So you shouldn't be actually loading a page or navigating from one page to another. All these are single-page applications, right? So they're snippets of content that is being loaded dynamically, and it paints the page. That's what React does, right? You create all these components, and then it builds the component for you. So if you're using React or Angular, then this is already for free. Okay. Controllers and components, they should handle all events that the user generates, all clicks, all keyboard events, all mouse events, or whatever should be handled by controllers and components, not by HTML content. State. So you should not be using local variables or JavaScript variable that remember something that if you reload the page, it's gone. Right. So you should your pages should be maintain state somehow, either encoded in the URL or some state at the application level, preferably at the URL. But I'll be okay with some state on the server. That's fine. It should be minimal, right? If you are using server-side state management. Any data that you're accessing from the client should have some kind of service that encapsulates access to that data. Right? So you shouldn't have fetch calls anywhere you want. Right? It should be encapsulated in a reusable modular service layer. File structure. So use one of the file structures that we have suggested throughout the course. If you're using React, use the file structure that you've used in the assignments. Or if you're using Angular or the mean stack, use the one we're going to be using for the next couple of weeks. If you've worked at and you have experience using another file structure, and you think that's better, then you feel free to use that other file structure. But use some file structure. Don't just put files anywhere you want. Follow a consistent organization of your application. User requirements. So you need to come up with at least 2 types of users. All right, so your audience should be at least 2 types of users, and they should be distinct from each other, right? Enough that each one should require a particular user interface for them as when they're logged in as that particular user. Right? You can in your registration page, folks should be able to maybe choose who they are. If you prefer creating some admin role where some admin user can come in and set somebody else's role, that's okay too. But I think it would be simpler to just folks, when they're registering, saying whether they're I'm registering as a faculty, I'm registering as a student. And I think that would be the simplest thing. And depending on how you register, your user interface should be different. Your profile should show different things, right? If I'm a buyer, for instance, I would not see products that I'm selling, right? I shouldn't be able to edit products. I shouldn't be able to do a whole bunch of things. But I should see things in my shopping cart, my previous orders. I should see reviews of products that I've written. If I'm a seller, I could see the products that folks have purchased. I could see some trends, what folks are searching for, things like that. So our profiles might be slightly different, right? Some of the web pages might be common to each other. Some of the use cases might be common to each other, to both types of users, but there should be enough difference between the users that they would have specific use cases. So user roles, you have to come up with 2 types of human users. Examples on an online store, you might be a seller, a buyer. Project management application, you might be developers, might be QA, you might be some project managers, you might be business analysts. On a restaurant, you might be the cook, waiters, delivery boy. receptionist, manager, owner, whatever. Right, so these are just examples of users, different roles. You should also obviously support an anonymous user, right, where you don't know who they are, but they still should be able to use a few things here and there. Obviously, they cannot create data. They can only consume data. They can only have read-only access to any of the content. Yeah, so at least 2 users, online store. Okay, so these are just more examples of those roles. Web service requirements. So you should identify, you should implement some local web service of your own, either using Node.js, which we're going to talk about today, or Java RESTful web services, which we've looked at in previously. Make sure that that the URLs that you're using for the web services are RESTful, right? If they follow the pattern of parent, ID, child, they all start with /API or /REST or /data. So they have some relationship on the data model that they are exposing. Make sure that if you're creating data, you use post. If you're reading data, using get. If you're updating data, using put. If you're deleting, use delete. So proper RESTful web services. Yes? Database requirements, you're free to use either MongoDB or MySQL. If you use MongoDB, we would encourage, you have to use Mongoose. If you're using MySQL, you have to use JPA. Okay? So we covered that last week. Maybe today, maybe next week, we'll talk about Mongoose. Data model requirements. So you'll have to create a data model, either in Java or in or Mongoose. You'll have to create some data model, and those data models should provide all the common CRUD operations of being able to create one, update one, delete one, find them all, or find by ID, or find by some predicate. Complexity, data model complexity. So you have to have at least 2 domain objects. Right, so there might be a playlist and a song, right? A recipe and ingredients. Any 2 domain objects. Okay. You'll have to have at least 2 user models. You'll have to have at least one one-to-many relationship between domain objects. So one-to-many between domain objects. Like, for instance, a recipe can contain many ingredients. That's a one-to-many. You have to have a one-to-many between users. So a manager can manage many other employees. So that's a one-to-many between users. You also need to have a many-to-many relationship. You have to, if you're using a non-relational database like Mongo and using Mongoose, you have to have implement at least one embedded schema, and we'll talk about that when we talk about Mongoose. You have to provide a UML class diagram describing your particular implementation. These are just some generic UML class diagrams as examples. External web API, okay, we said that already, right? So you need to choose a remote web API, either IMDb or YouTube or Yelp, Yahoo, Weather Channel, Yumly. Choose an API. One good place to start is programmable web. So this is a repository of APIs that you can search for. So any domain that you can think of, typically there will be an API for it. It'll typically be either in JSON format or XML or SOAP, or some of them might be in CSV or comma delimited or tab format. There's all sorts of formats. What else? Let's see. I think that's it. All right. Any questions? So this is due the 10th, December 10th, right? Okay. Yes. So the rubrics will be taken straight from each sentence. So, like, consider each sentence worth a point. Yes. I'm sorry, say again? SQLite? And how? Okay. Sure. Yeah, I mean, it has its own ORM, right? That maps models to tables, right? Yeah, as long as there's some object relational mapping or some library that abstracts access to a database. What I don't want to see is direct SQL queries. Yeah. Yes.
Are there any examples, like good examples that we can take a look at for the rest of the class?
Sure.
Do we have like expectation?
Yep. Yeah, I'll share that. I'll share that with you. There's I think in the previous Piazza there's a whole bunch of examples. I'll just copy them over. Yeah. Anything else? Okie dokie.